Todos. Em primeiro lugar, sejam todos muito bem-vindos ao terceiro dia do evento organizado pela Revista Estudantes de Direito da Universidade de Brasília, intitulado Diálogos Acadêmicos, uma visão 360 graus da crise do COVID-19. Meu nome é Matheus Depieri, eu sou um dos editores-chefes da revista e hoje eu vou ter o grande prazer de falar com o professor Mohamed Arafa sobre a questão dos direitos humanos. Apenas a título de uma breve apresentação, o Dr. Mohamed é mestre em Direito pela Universidade de Connecticut e doutor em Direito pela Universidade de Indiana. Ele também é professor-assistente de Direito na Faculdade de Direito da Universidade de Alexandria, professor adjunto na University of Indiana Law School e também é professor-visitante tanto na Universidade de Cornell quanto na Universidade de Brasília. Professor Mohamed, thank you very much for being here with us today.
Thanks very much, Matt. It's great and a great pleasure and absolute honor to be with you. Thanks for having me on board. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Professor. This interview will be conducted in English, and Professor Mohamed is talking to us directly from Egypt. So we're very happy that he took a little bit of time to talk to us about human rights issue. Professor Mohamed, a first question we would like to ask you is regarding human rights restrictions in times of pandemics. Do you believe it is possible to narrow human rights, for example, the right to come and go, or the right to peaceful assembly, in the context of COVID-19?
That's a very good question, Matt. It's interesting because it's perplexing as well, because there have been a lot of discussions and debates around how we will deal with issues on human rights, specifically, like as you mentioned, right of assembly or right of association, or right of, it started to hit countries. It started in Europe and then get back to the United States and then get to Latin America. And now we have it here in Africa. So I can tell you within the situation in the Middle East, specifically at this time, I can tell you, yes, that all governments and all current administrations at the current moment are limiting and put some restrictions on human rights generally. Specifically, if you will manage or deal with issues on protest law or association laws or gatherings or meetings or right to assembly, as you mentioned, or even freedom of information or freedom of press or such things. So we do have some restrictions at the current moment within the current government, as I can tell you. And these restrictions, as probably you may surprise, we have a kind of a partial curfew by the government, which means that Egyptian people will not be allowed to go out their houses at specific period of time. And at the current moment, we have this since, like I can say, like a month and a half, like this curfew started at 8 p.m. Till 7 a.m. in the morning, which means that people are not allowed to get out their homes, and there are punishments for that. However, people or Egyptians generally are staying outside and they go outside, they never listen, which is, for me, it's a kind of concerning because it's always like they didn't give the issue much seriousness, which I really scared and make me like saying, oh, I need to get out of the country before we really get at the peak. Yes, because people are like, oh, I mean, we are good. We mostly have, I think, 11,000 cases till now, according to the I mean, I can tell you, I'm not sure if it's transparent or not, but the official statistics by the government, by the Secretary of our Health Secretary, she mentioned that we have this, we have like 650 just cases of death till now, which is, I think, compared to Italy or Spain or even the United States or even Brazil, which I hear that the number is growing, which is make me sad. And of course, when I see how the government deal with the issue, it's a little bit tricky to see how things are managed by administration. But this curfew have been applied by all of the Middle Eastern governments, not only Egyptian government, but have been applied in Jordan, have been applied in Tunisia, and have been applied in Lebanon, have been applied in Morocco, and have been applied, of course, in the Gulf area, like in Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates. And I can tell you, this curfew have been diversified from like a partial curfew or a complete shutdown. Like, for example, in Saudi Arabia, they started to have a complete shutdown, which means that people will not be allowed to go outside of their houses for 2 weeks. They are not allowed to do that. They have a little exceptions on that, only for if they wanted to go to pharmacies or to go to the a bakery or something like that. And you have also to mention and to give like kind of like a document saying that you have an emergency thing if you want to go or something like that. So emergency status also at some point in different Middle Eastern countries have been applied, as they announce that we are under a public health crisis. You know, so that's which I think under mostly under constitutions, it allows the administrations use specific measures to limit or restrict individuals' rights, civil liberties, and freedoms generally. But I do believe that in our area here in the MENA region, I mean, not only Egypt, but the whole MENA, I mean, the Middle Eastern and the North African region, I can say that the COVID-19 is a kind of an interesting issue for them now, because they're using it as a kind of a justification to justify their restrictions on human rights generally, that what we already have here. As you know, I mean, I have been talking about this a lot. Remember, at the University of Brasilia, different, I mean, around the world. I mean, when I teach in the United States to my students, and even, I mean, however, I cannot talk about it in Egypt. I mean, you know, so it's the good thing when I'm Zooming right now that I'm getting from my account to the law school in Indiana, which is not tracked. So it's good because it's very secure. You know, so that's a good thing. I mean, when I was like telling you I cannot get into the phone and stuff, because I mean, however, my phone is very secured because it's from the US. But I mean, when you get in here, I think they have a kind of a program or something that you can realize that the government have to track people, specifically academics or something like that. So I always be careful when I use my phone here. So this is what I wanted to do my Zoom thing from my account to the law school in Indiana. So it's interesting to see how the governments generally in the Middle East are restricting and limiting human rights in general, freedom of information, specifically when we talk about refugees and things like that. You will see there will be kind of restrictions, and one of my concerns specifically at this time, that the Middle Eastern governments will apply these restrictions. For me, it seems it's going to be for a while. I mean, I know for European countries, for the United States, however, it will stay for a little, and then things will be reopened and will be back to normality. Of course, it's going to take a while for sure, as we know. Like I can say that some European countries right now, like Italy or Spain, they start to ease the restrictions to get back to life or to normalcy or to their routine. But here, I think it will be a kind of a tool to justify the suppression of human rights. So they will always like say, oh, let's do the curfew for a while. However, as I told you, that people are not respecting the curfews, they are not respecting the instructions coming from the government. You will see a lot of people are not wearing masks in the streets. They going outside and they do like the Mediterranean culture. They kiss each other, they hug each other, which I will like, when I go outside, I said, what the hell are you guys doing? You shouldn't do that under this kind of circumstances at the current moment. But I mean, I think also part of it is related to culture, which means that it will be very complicated to tell people, oh, you don't have to do that. I mean, you can tell them, and the government saying that, and also like people, I mean, among themselves, but you are not going to see that a lot of people are listening. People that have been respecting the quarantine or the lockdown, mostly like the well-educated people, like have been, I came from Indiana here, like as I mentioned to you, like by March 12th, and they have been under this lockdown for almost 2 months. I get out of the house almost just, I think, 4 times in 65 days. Can you imagine? Can you imagine that man, that people like saying that he's always on aircraft every single week or 2 weeks under lockdown in my parents' house here in Egypt for almost 65 days? And I feel really up. Yes, it's and people are not respecting when I get out of the house for urgent things. that people are okay, it's fine. I mean, they didn't feel that there is something really serious, and they was like saying, oh my God, I mean, that's they are not aware that we may reach the peak soon or something like that, as European countries, as the United States, I think also at the Latin American countries as well. So I think when it comes even to human rights at the current moment under the pandemic time, you will, I mean, when you talk to people, you will hear, I mean, nothing about it. I mean, they really don't. I mean, I was like shocked when I came here in March, and it was like, I mean, they really don't care. It was I was on board with a Canadian friend. He was in a visit to Cairo for work, also for fun, and he was like talking to me about human rights issues and stuff like that. And he told me, Mohamed, what do you think? And I told him, when we land, you will see what I think. And at the airport, when we get our luggages together, and I told him, now I'm telling you what I think. You can see right now. What are you talking about? His name is Justin. I told him, Justin, what are you talking about? Human rights what here right now? Then he got like, and he said, in terms of human rights or civil liberties is in that way. But I mean, in short, man, I can tell you, we do have restrictions here on the human rights issues, not only because of the pandemic. We have that before for a while. I can tell you, I'm not sure if you will see, even after the pandemic, I'm not sure if you will see a kind of, a good signs to say that we will have a good human rights environment. I was like just published a piece on media laws in Egypt, and it's come out very soon by Florida Law Review. And I was like talking about the recent media law that here have been like just enacted by the current government. And I was like, wow. I mean, when I was like looking at the laws, you can see that the laws is very suppressing. Is just the parliament or the House of Representatives is just enacting these laws in order to use them as tools to suppress the general public, which is sad to hear, specifically after this Primavera Árabe, as we call it in Portuguese, or the Arab Spring, which is totally a big failure, as I can tell you. So, yeah.
Yeah, we are living a very difficult moment, I believe, worldwide. And Professor Mohamed, as you started speaking, can you please explain us a little bit more how the pre-existing humanitarian crisis that existed in some Middle East and North Africa countries was deepened due to the coronavirus outbreak, and specifically what kind of economic measures are the government taken in order to ease the economic crisis?
It's a very wonderful question, too. We live under a very hard economic circumstances, not only in Egypt, but within, I mean, I can say in the whole world. But of course, when it comes to the third world countries or the Middle East, it's not easy, because it also depends, you know, on the different, you take a lot of factors and elements with respect to each country. So, for example, the Egyptian economy is different than the Tunisian one, is different than the Lebanese one, is different than, and of course, if you compare to the Gulf area, like in Saudi Arabia or United Arab Emirates or Bahrain or Kuwait, things are totally different, because if you look at the currency and you look at the inflation and you look at the public budget in those countries, you will see also the supply and demands, the chain of the supply and demands things here. It's not, I can say it's not in a stable way to make sure that you will have a kind of, I can say, economic stability for a while. So for the current moment, like for example, Egypt are having problems with the economic stance in terms of, as you mentioned, specifically under the COVID-19. So, for example, there are a lot of blue-collar workers are without, are out of their jobs now. The government is not securing as much as it should be. They're kind of a little donation. They start to give them like 500 Egyptian pounds, which is almost, I can tell you, like it could be like $60. in a month. Can you imagine? And this is the little donation that give the blue collar workers, the people that they are not officially working with with a specific, or they have a specific job, they have a stable situation. This one thing happened. You can see that there we start to get to borrow another loan by, like, I think $2 billion from the IMF, in order to make sure that we will be able to flourish our economy. On the other hand, we will have a big part of the loans I think on the Egyptian generations to come, because we still like getting borrowing from the IMF and these loans, and as we always had, even before in the other governments before, or the other presidents did the same thing. They wanted, even I heard some kind of decisions last night regarding how we will start reopen and ease restrictions in order to make sure that economy will be much better. Like, for example, as you know, all restaurants, all bars, all cafes are shut down completely. Of course, in addition to schools, universities, and all that, they have been shut down. All of the private, I can say private, the private sector plus the public sector, for sure, totally, to allow some restaurants, bars, and even the blue car workers to get into back to normal life, of course, with some precautionary measures. So I heard that the Prime Minister last night wanted to make the wearing the masks as mandatory for everybody going outside, specifically if you are going to a public office, or if you are in a public transportation. So they wanted to do that. And there will be a very heavy punishment, which I'm sure they will fail to apply, as always. So that's how it works. I mean, that's how the laws here, it always works like that. Oh, we have good laws on the papers, but nothing will apply on the ground, you know, because how you will be able to apply this kind of things for 100 million people here? I mean, we are like, the population here of Egypt is 100 million. You know, so it's not easy, specifically if the level of education is not in a good shape as well. You know, there are cultural things need to be changed. You know, so that's make things are much more complicated. So I think the idea of the measures that the government are taking, just they are copying and paste from what the European countries are doing. This is what we always like to do. So so we will have like social distancing, feet precautions when bars and restaurants are open. I was like saying, oh, that's good. Okay, so I was like looking at a TV show like 2 days ago, and I was watching how the Netherlands dealing with the issue at the current moment, and I saw that in the Netherlands they put peoples together in like a kind of a glass boxes for each two couples, or for each 2-3 friends or something, for restaurants. And then I was like saying, oh wow, are we will be able to do that here in Egypt? And they said, oh, we will do that. And they said, oh, good, I would love to see this. Of course, I would not be able to do this, because how many cafeterias in Egypt? We have like millions of cafeterias. People never ever think about social distancing here. I mean, they always have this, as you know, they have I'm not sure how do you call it in Portuguese, the argile thing, we call the shisha thing, and then so they are like together and having fun and watching soccer things, as when I've been always also to Brazilian bars. It's the same thing. I mean, I see people socialing, and they hug each other, kiss each other. It's the same thing we have here. So, and I was like saying, oh, the government, we're gonna do these very about, there is a cultural factor here, because also, and I think I mentioned that to you and to your colleagues and to your friends before in Brazil, like it's always, for me, it's interesting, because I see like Western people always like listening when they hear the instructions, and they listen. Of course, not 100% everybody like I mean, enforcing the rules or something. But here the problem is, here And there is nobody, I mean, as I told you, within the middle of the pandemic, and they don't care. He said, it's okay, we will be fine, we have a very good immune system. I said, what the hell are you talking about? So it's like, yeah, I mean, you'll see a lot of people here like saying, oh, we are very strong. I mean, Egyptians have a very good immune system. And they was like saying, is that the scientific stuff that you are talking about? So it is like, okay, I totally understand that probably Africa, till now, we are not in a bad shape, which is okay, that's for sure. Right? I mean, at least we are not like hit as Europe or as the United States or even some Latin American countries. We still, but we probably may reach the peak soon. We are not sure, you know? And when people talking about like, oh, it's good here as part of the culture, as remember when I talk about the culture as they have the Islamic culture and the Islamic perspective, which is fine. I mean, to believe in religion, and this is fine. I have no problem with that. But you cannot say, okay, we are good because God protect us. And they said, I'm sorry, what do you mean by that? I mean, what does that mean? You know? So you protected by God and the Westerns are not? What do you mean by this? So it's for me, sometimes you can hear some discussion like this and they said, I'm sorry. So it's, if we get to this point, I do think that the cultural factor playing a fundamental role here. I mean, you cannot like saying, and I can tell, okay, the government is trying its best. The government trying to copy and paste in order to say to the international community, we are doing this and this and this, and we are doing like Spain, we're doing like Italy, we're doing like Germany, we're trying to do like the United States. But at the same point, you have to understand that German people are not like Egyptian people. American people, I mean, as I mentioned to you, each country have its different status, its different economic activities. I mean, everybody in the United States can work online. That's okay. I mean, however, they are getting mad of that. They have the facilities to do that. And this is why we can see that at the end of the spring semester, we continued like teaching online. We didn't have any problem with that. Exams have been set up online and stuff like that. But I can tell you, when I get back here to Egypt and they get to the law school in Alexandria, they have big problems in order to set up the final exams of the spring. They are not aware. So they said, okay, so let's ask them to make research. And they said, what? Like specifically, if you are talking about 25,000 people in the law school, you need to get research from that. And for law department, like you need a research in criminal law, in civil law, in tort, and they said, what? Who gonna like grade these, and who gonna? And of course, students never aware of the research method and stuff like that. So mostly they were gonna copy and paste like for 2 pages and stuff like that, and they don't care. So I was like saying, okay, so when we're talking about countries around, we have to make sure about our facilities and their facilities, you know? So the economic measure that they are taking, I think it will be at some point, it would be good on a temporal or a short run, like in terms of people will start like in 2 weeks, okay, so we're gonna wear masks because if there are some police around, they're gonna arrest us or something like that, or pay a fine or something like that for 2-3 weeks. But I can guarantee to you, like in a month, these things will not going to be like applied. I mean, all of the economic, which will affect all the economic sectors, including specifically the public officials and also like the blue collar workers, that they are not allowed to secure any kind of funds. They are not they are not having any kind of social security or Medicare or I mean, any kind of benefits that we do have when you get your tenured permanent job. You know, so it's very upsetting to see how the governments are dealing with this. On the other hand, I can tell you that some of the Gulf countries right now are taking out a lot of non-citizen people that they are working there as workers and stuff like that, which is very, I think, tricky too. Like, which means that if some Egyptians are working in Kuwait or are working in United Arab Emirates, and now we are in a crisis thing, so we are not able to pay them or something, so they ask them to go back to Egypt, and we have a lot. They got it back, and because the countries are not able to secure funds or secure benefits or secure any kind of, I can say, economic stances for folks. I mean, Uh, However, when I look at the economic measures that, for example, in the United States, it's not easy also to reopen again. And Anthony Fauci, the advisor for the task force on the coronavirus in Washington, have been like saying that we shouldn't be like very fast or very quick in reopening the economy because we might receive another second wave of the pandemic, which may be critical, which may end up with a very big crash within the economy, and of course within the public health issues of the individuals themselves. Um, it's unfortunate that we will not be able to be secure 100% until we get a vaccine. There is no way to be like, I remember the same thing of the swine flu. I was in the States at that time when I was a doctorate student, and I remember the school was like sending us emails to get to the what would they call the clinic to get the vaccine for the students and for the faculty. So it's an interesting thing. I mean, it's good, but this is also because of the facilities that they have. For example, we don't have these facilities here in Egypt if we have something like that. And of course, I was like saying, oh, Egypt is waiting for the international community to develop a vaccine in order to get some. And of course, when they develop a vaccine, they will try to get it to their neighbors and to their allies first, and then, okay, so let's think about the other allies, you know? So it depends. So here the economic, I can say the economic interests will be diversified. However, there are a lot of debates about that. I mean, integrated with this economic debates or arguments that they said this virus probably is kind of politically motivated or I mean, it's, you know, the conspiracy theories and like maybe to be honest, I'm not believing in that. I think it's naturally developed, and it could be, it might be, there is some things related to how the virus have been developed. I was, to be honest, in January, I was within the Christmas vacation, I was with a friend in Maryland, and I was like, oh, the corona, we had been like a little discussion about the coronavirus, and I was like saying, oh, come on, and it's not a big deal. And at the beginning, I was not aware that it will be like a big deal and it will hit countries like that. And I thought if it will hit, it will hit probably China, as it was just the main issue, how, or the main place that the virus came from at the beginning, or how it's in Wuhan, and the story of the lab after this that we heard about. But no way that, I mean, there are people still like believing in that, and they said that's because of the economic interest. But to be honest, I'm not believing in this. I mean, personally, I'm not. You could be, but I'm not sure about it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you very much. And Professor, in the line of fake news and conspiracy theories and everything, how do you believe it is possible to guarantee freedom of expression and at the same time avoid proliferation of fake news that might, for example, make harder to control the coronavirus dissemination? So how can we kind of balance these two principles? So the right of accurate information and the right of freedom of expression.
Muito obrigado for that question, Matt. This is an awesome question, because the word fake news you used, actually, it's a part of my new articles coming out within the same title, The Archaeology of the Fake News in Egypt. I call it like that, yes. Which is the, you know, fake news, it's mostly the expression used by Donald Trump, you know, so it's the main concern that always, every single day, we hear Donald Trump is just saying fake news and his attacks on reporters generally. And that's a big concern. Like, you know, like when I was talking to my friend yesterday at Souza, and he was telling me how he see the rule of law in the United States is under threat, specifically because of the media attacks by Donald Trump. I'm not sure if you heard yesterday that President Obama, he delivered a kind of a speech for the ceremony for all graduates, because, as you know, all of the graduation ceremonies in the United States got canceled, you know. So President Obama just delivered the speech, and he was, in a part of his speech, he was criticizing Donald Trump and the policies of Donald Trump. And then one of the reporters last night, I was like watching CNN, and I remember he or she, I'm not sure if he or she, and they asked him, what do you think about what President Barack Obama mentioned? And he was like saying, he's just an inconfident and disgraceful president. I said, what are you talking? Can you imagine that the president of the United States is just talking in the way of his previous president? Even if you are not agreeing with his policies, you shouldn't talk in that way, which means that even media and as you're telling me, the fake news issues is just under attack, even in big democracies like the United States. And the big example on that is Trump policies and his administration. Of course, when I was talking about the elections and the upcoming election, hopefully Joe Biden will get in, and we will see how the Americans will really deal with this situation at this time. Within the middle even of the crisis that we have, I mean, the health crisis that we have, before the pandemic, I was sure, I can tell you, I was sure that Trump will secure another 4 years into office. So I came here, like, as I told you, like by mid-March, and there was like telling people and people asking me, and I told them, of course, Trump will get in again. After the pandemic and how his administration and his government was not able to respond to the crisis in a well manner or in a well-shaped things. I mean, in terms of dealing with physicians and doctors and medical assistance and medical support and all that. I was like saying, of course, here we have to wait a minute. It's specifically after the episode of getting Joe Biden, I mean, as the only Democratic nominee after all of the other nominees get out. I mean, I was not even like that fan of Joe Biden. I mean, but of course I will vote for Joe. I mean, anyone will defeat Trump, I will vote for. I was like fan of Kamala Harris. I was fan of Pete Buttigieg. I have been fan of probably Amy Klobuchar. So there are, I mean, of course, I mean, I'm not agreeing with all of their policies, but there are much, I mean, like, you can see that there are something. But however, if we have Joe Biden, which is kind of much, you can say, much better choice to the Americans, probably, maybe at the current moment, I can say that the idea of fake news and the freedom of information and the media rights and things like that will be, I think, redesigned again in the United States, because there is a big attack now. And this is why I can tell you all of the Middle Eastern autocrats are happy with Donald Trump. And they are really, really, I can tell you, I can assure you that they are praying every single day that he will secure another 4 years into office, because he supports autocrats everywhere in the Middle East. Not only in the Middle East, but I mean, you can see he, I mean, supports Putin, he supports Kim Jong-un, he supports in Saudi Arabia. I mean, you know how it works. So I think if Joe Biden get in November, it will be a big deal in terms of fake. We'll never ever hear about these terms again. There was no such a thing. I mean, this is just a kind of an invention or whatever. That does not mean that every single media is great. We cannot say that too. But I mean, the interesting point is that, at least for me, as somebody like came from the Middle East and went to the United States as a kid, like 19 years old, and to see democracy and these big things there, and now we see like that a lot of people that they have been supporting Donald Trump is supporting his policies, which mean that it's fine to attack media or to attack reporters, things that we see in our countries, but we never thought that we will see this in the United States, the country that they consider themselves the biggest democracy in the world, or as they pretend, they can say. If that accurate, but this pandemic will be used and exploited by governments here in the region in terms of fake news, and I can tell you specifically when the military is in charge. Because if the military is in charge in different parts, I mean, here, for example, in Egypt, the military is in charge of every single thing dealing with a pandemic. Can you imagine? Like, even the masks production, they are in charge of producing masks. Can you imagine? So if you are like talking, the military will, so we're talking about the freedom of information and the freedom of like media things, it's restricted here, and it will be continue to be restricted in this region. However, I know that there will going to be a shift in the United States in that perspective if Joe Biden get in. That's we have to wait and see. But the crisis will be, of course, manipulated by governments here, or the autocratic governments in the region, in order to continue suppressing media outlets and media platforms. That's for sure. Like continuing, like shut down some social media accounts, Twitter things, and tracking people around if they are dealing with political activities or political activism or youth activism or things like that, which I assume that the government will continue using the pandemic, and they were going to say, oh, okay, so they will justify that by the pandemic crisis, in order to just make sure that things looks legitimate. However, it's not legitimate within its context, I think.
Thank you so much for your explanation, Professor. So just one last question. In your point of view, how can we guarantee that the travel restrictions and limited freedom of circulation, for example, will not be used, for example, to deny a person the right to request refuge or to perpetrate prejudices against certain cultures, specifically, for example, in the United States with travel bans?
That's a very good question, Matt. But and you mentioned the United States. You heard probably that 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago that the United States government put like a travel, not a travel ban, I want to say, but a temporal ban on securing green cards for people that they are applying for green cards. So Trump administration put like a 60 days on hold for people that they're securing the permanent residence of the United States. And you mentioned the travel ban. I do believe that there will be some restrictions. Specifically, we have this pandemic crisis, plus the refugees crisis, specifically when you're talking about borders problem. And here, when I'm talking about borders, I really do like to detail the borders here within the Middle East and European countries, because we do have like very close borders with specifically with Europe, like for example with Italy. I mean, Libya and Italy, Egypt and Italy, France or Germany. I mean, so we do have very close borders with them. I do assume there will be a lot of restrictions from the European countries, generally from the countries generally to people that they wanted to travel, not only to travel just temporarily, but for people that secure residence or secure to leave their countries because of any poor conditions that they are living under. So for sure will be a lot of laws will be enacted in that. I was actually talking to some friends if governments will start to put some laws and some restrictions or bans for a while, even for temporal travel, for visitors and stuff, because of the pandemic. And because of the pandemic will be the main justification. But I mean, indeed not, just we putting some restrictions because like we're tired of people coming from everywhere to get residence, for example. And we heard a lot of that when Marine Le Pen wanted to get into the election with Macron, and she was mentioning this about, specifically when she talked about Muslims and the Arabs, and she said, oh, we have to stop the flow of Muslims and Arabs coming from the region to France. She mentioned the same thing. We heard about the same thing in Hungary, for example, in the Netherlands, when they got speculate what was going to happen. But in my perspective, I do assume that we will have some restrictions, and these restrictions will be like getting in a way that it will halt like some, I can say like some policies with respect to restrictions on travel, restrictions on movement. They will ask probably for some documents like IDs, or why you are coming here, what kind of job you will have, what kind of things like that. That's my wonder.
Professor Mohamed, I believe we have a small issue with your internet. So
Yeah, I mean, the last question, I mean, for the last part that you mentioned, I do assume and believe that there will be a lot of restrictions and on travel and right to movement for sure. I mean, that's for sure. We will have this. We cannot speculate 100% what kind of procedures that each country will have. Um, I do assume even for temporal travel from different parts of the world, we'll have some requirements or restrictions. Like they're gonna ask, I need a health report from somewhere that you are good, and in terms that we are justifying that under a public health crisis that we're living right now, which is the COVID-19. So I do assume it will be some restrictions on this, Matt, which will be at some point. I'm not sure how you will how we can deal with it. Like, for example, some country said that we will have people coming to us, but need to be 14 days quarantine. So I am not sure. However, I think that the French Constitutional Council in France just recently said this is unconstitutional. You cannot enforce people to do that, to be under quarantine for 14 days. However, other scholars mentioned that that's an emergency case and that's an exceptional circumstances and things like that. So it still depends, Matt. We cannot speculate, but for sure, I can guarantee you that we will have a lot of restrictions coming. That concern me because I do travel a lot, as you know, so I'm not sure. I'm trying every time what kind of restriction that governments will put, you know, so that's it's tricky. It is, yeah.
yeah. So Professor Mohamed, thank you very much for your explanations, for your speech. It was very amazing, and we could learn and understand much more about MENA countries and the human rights issues due to COVID-19. So thank you very much for your availability and for your speech that you brought us today. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. You bet.
Bom, encerramos aqui